All right. Hi, I'm Leonardo Flores, and uh, I'll be presenting a little bit of my experience in translating a poem called Enigma N by Jim Andrews, a Canadian poet, who who wrote this poem in English in 1997 using a program or a programming structure called dynamic HTML or DHTML. This piece is available on the web, and what I did recently was I translated it to Spanish. Uh, so this poem has been translated a few times into Finnish and Chinese, and most recently in Spanish. I deliberately did not show very well the Spanish translation because it's a reveal for later. However, we can see that the work, and I recorded a video so you can see it in action, presents the title, Enigma. You can see the word meaning there. And as we activate the different aspects of the program, of the menu, prod, stir, tame, we can, if we click it repeatedly, it changes it. Meaning, we can return to the word, we can pause it, we can add color to it, in Canadian spelling, as you can see, spell it. We can discombobulate it, but it needs to be moving for us to see the effect of this discombobulation, in which it is sometimes in changing sizes, sometimes at the same time, sometimes individually. We can change the speed at which it moves, and we can read about the poem. It ends with Enigma is a philosophical poetry toy for poets and philosophers from the age of 4 up. So the idea here, what we're talking about is digital language, or language in digital environments, right? When we look at printed language, we can describe it in terms of its linguistic content and its graphical content, what it says and what it looks like. With digital language, you can add a layer of behavior to it. So what does that language do, and under what conditions? And then how do we read this digital language? So if we were to have some questions towards interpretation of this poem, or this e-poem, is meaning an enigma under these conditions? Can we understand what it says? How many meanings can the same linguistic text have when animated, recombined, resized, colored, and so on? And how can we exert control over this language to reach meaning? We do have the ability to pause it, which makes it more readable. We can activate it and pause it until we can read things there, so to speak. Or is meaning beside the point? And is maybe that the point of this work? So how do we translate it? Well, step one, we want to identify the words, right? So we have Enigma N, prod, stir, tame, spell, 0, 1, color, discombobulate, speed, about, and run away. And of course, we have the word meaning. And we could do the Phyllis Webb. We could translate at the beginning. We have the Phyllis Webb quote. At the end, we have the explanation. That is sort of the linguistic field of it. Should be fairly simple. So to translate it into Spanish, we take these texts, right? The world is round, it moves in circles, el mundo es redondo, se mueve en círculos, and so on. Enigma N is Enigma N because enigma is both enigma in Spanish and in English. Meaning becomes significado, etc., etc. Task complete. The matter of, an hour or so's work. But no. We have a little problem, and it's that we have an anagram. Enigma N and meaning are anagrams. And therefore, part of the key aspect of this work is the recombination of the letters. When you move them, they recombine, you can make other words, and you can make things that are non-words that have no meaning. So the pairing of these anagrammatic words create this conceptual space between meaning and the unknowable, the enigma. So how can we preserve this anagram in translation? Well, here's a little look at my anagram machine. I went to print, handwriting, manuscript, and I started shuffling things around. So with Enigma N, I could find two words, imagen and guíame. The problem is you have leftover letters. With imagen, you have a leftover N, so it could be imagen N, but and you could try guíame. If you were to take the N and rotate it, it turns into a U, right? And then if you superpose them, then they're still there, but technically you preserve the anagram in some ways. So I wrote to Jim Andrews. I wrote my dissertation on his work, and we've established a good professional and personal relationship. I suggested superposing, I suggested rotation, I suggested black letters on a black background. They're invisible. When you hit color, pop, they appear. I was always there. But what we concluded and what Jim concluded was, yeah, it sounds a bit to me like creating something that is almost an anagram, and that doesn't work in anagram land. So, second attempt, he suggested, let's treat the N as a variable, which it is. Enigma N, it could be a number, right? So if you have a variable, it could be other letters. So with the task, I went A through Z, Enigma A, and I searched for anagrams. And the best thing I could get to, and I was tempted by enigmas, which, you could keep the same one, but then it doesn't create that sort of space between two words. So the best I could get to was Enigma R. So we could have the words emigran, to emigrate. The words moving, might, emigrate, okay. Margine, to send to the margins, part of what it's doing in some of those operations. Or germina, to germinate, to produce. And we went with germina. Enigma R, germina, translating puyar and revolver. That was not difficult. So there we have it. The problem, task complete, right? No, let's peel the onion a little. Another layer. You see, when you mouse over each one of those texts, you can see words, time, meaning, spell it out, 0, 1, start, stop, color, meaning, discombobulate meaning, speed of meaning, about Enigma, and run away, visit Ted Warnell. So I need to translate this mouse over text. Okay, no problem. We just need to go to the source code, find those words, and translate them. That's easy. So into the source code we go. So for people who are new to ELIT, the source code is the code that's read by the browser. The browser then interprets that as instructions, and it generates the text that we read on the web. It also contains comments. That green text you see there is documentation, is comments. So these are not run by the browser. They're simply there for human readers to go and generally understand what is going on with that particular piece of code. And Jim Andrews' code is loaded with insightful commentary. I'll show some of that. So to translate the source code, well, what needs translation? The mouse over text. Well, in the documentation, okay. And, the variables maybe, right? Because they're part of what happens. And, there's some wordplay in there we're going to discover. There's also vestigial variables, variables that are no longer in use. We have an entire subroutine that was deprecated, that was retracted from focus. I'll show you in a bit. And the question at the end is, do we translate the code itself? The code itself is in English. And there are some wordplay things going on in there. So, translating the mouse over. So this is more or less what it looks like, right? Here's the mouse over. And on mouse over, you activate prod mouse over, okay. And then the title, prod meaning. So there it is, right? We just translate that. But, and see, we have stir meaning and tame meaning. We saw these in operation earlier. Except prod mouse over. What is that? Wait a second. Let's take a look. Aha! There's a little section called miscellaneous in which you have these functions called that affect the window status. Now, this is something that browsers back then had by default, and it is a little bar in the bottom of the browser that said the status, and in there, that was a writing space. Whenever you put your pointer over that, it would pull up the title, the little, pop-up mouse over text, but also in the status, you'd have a little text. So that needs translated too, because even though contemporary browsers don't use that anymore, one could still potentially activate it. It's there, it's part of what he wrote. So we can see things that he's also playing with some of the ideas. Meaning prod meaning, stir meaning stir, repeated tamings collapse meaning within itself, spell meaning out, spell for literalists. So we can see all sorts of things that gesture towards intention, attitudes towards particular things. We also have insightful bits of code here. So for example, when we look here at the geometry 1, geometry 2, geometry 3, and we can talk about parameterized analytic geometry. But notice here we're stirring meaning, the letters have a common center. When we tame meaning, the letters have a common point of intersection. And when we are prodding meaning, the letters have no relation to one another. So if it seems like they're similar operations, but a little different, this spells it out. Also, we have discombobulate, and he talks about discombobulate, and then we also have combobulate, and we have bobulate. So he is unpacking that term. We also have the vestigial code. So function follow has been disabled, detracted from focus. This function controls behavior on mouse moves. When you move the mouse, notice that the letters seem to separate into two distinct groups. The two groups, when this timer is this, the two groups are name and gin. When 200, J timer, the two groups are image and NN. And later in the timer, the two groups are game and nin. So right there, he's also playing with the anagrams. He's also, affecting, and it's part of the poem, right? Except he took it away. He detracted it from focus, but left that vestigial code, an appendix of sorts. Also the insightful commentary. So right at the very opening, right from the start, welcome to the neath text, the underneath text of Enigma N. Enigma N is the philosophical poetry toy for poets and philosophers from the age of 4 and up, if you want a link. And then he talks a little bit about the history of it, that it was updated in 2004 for browsers of the time. Written in 1998, the browsers themselves had changed. And most recently, he upgraded it so that it runs well on mobile devices and contemporary browsers. Also at the bottom, much later in the code, after you've been reading, you see, if you're reading this, I don't know really why. You could be reading it to see how the piece was done so you can do the HTML yourself, or you're looking for the true meaning of the piece, or you're a visual source viewer, or I'm not sure whether to talk about the mechanics of the piece here or not. Nah, that's technique, and technique is hard won, but anybody can do it. Of course, now, when he wrote this, there wasn't an area called critical code studies. Right now, we read code. We're very interested in code. We study the code, And I think I've shown some ways in which code can be very productive in how we present and how we interpret the work. So to translate the code, what did I translate? Well, documentation, functions, variables. I did not translate either the JavaScript or the HTML because these are English language programming markup languages. And here is the result. Germina. El mundo es redondo, se mueve en círculos, and we can see the work at play. So, this plays through, I'll simply point out, we're looking at the surface text. We're looking at the poem as intended to be displayed. But the poem is very much like an iceberg here. The code underneath really gives it more depth than what we might get just on the surface. If you'd like to read more about this, I have a project called I Love E-Poetry, where I have reviewed not only the contemporary version of Enigma N, but also an older version that he published in Cauldron and Net. And it's interesting to see the code for that one and compare it to the code for the contemporary one. There we have multiple editions and multiple versions. So thank you very much.
Can you put the website?
Yes, I will actually give you a card for the website. So it'll be even better. Thank you all very much.